This presentation, with your permission, Your Excellency, will be in two parts. I'll do a quick opening remarks, and then our head of strategy and programs will do a short deck explaining what the 24-hour economy is about. So thank you very much for the invitation. Today's theme goes to the heart of our national reset agenda: building institutions that deliver measurable outcomes for citizens. The public service is a constitutional pillar. Under Chapter 14, the Public Services Commission safeguards merit, professional standards, and fair appointments. It runs within an ecosystem in which boards set policy for their entities, the Auditor General and Parliament enforce financial accountability, the National Development Planning Commission frames national plans, and the local government service executes locally. When this system works, the state serves the public predictably, transparently, and at notable scale. Across the Fourth Republic, many reforms have advanced, yet persistent weaknesses, if we are to be true to ourselves, continue to hold back performance. Authority is fragmented. Appointments are often politicized, even at the technical level. Performance management can be weak, and data often sits in silos. Compliance is often valued over outcomes, and enforcement can be very weak and soft. Challenges in revenue mobilization across successive administrations tell us that this is a systemic issue rather than a matter of individual effort. The result is a trust deficit that we cannot afford in a region where institutional fragility has had real consequences. Institutional fragility has had consequences of often that are negative, and even in our own history, tragic. We all have a shared responsibility. Political leadership sets direction. Professional leadership, such as yourselves, run systems. Performance depends on design, how we recruit, incentivize, digitize, supervise, and measure work outcomes against set performance indicators that are agreed with government. I would like to use the 24-hour economy as a practical case study rather than just a slogan. It is a test of whether our institutions can deliver services reliably, digitally, and around the clock. Citizens and businesses must be able to apply for permits, pay taxes, clear goods, access health and emergency services, and obtain information with speed and certainty at any hour. That is progress. That requires clear service levels for regulation, interoperable platforms across ministries, departments, agencies, metropolitan, municipal, and district assemblies, a single identity and address framework, and real nighttime operations for safety, transport, inspections, and utilities. It also requires data-driven allocation of resources and accountability for results rather than just the activity itself. This, in turn, calls for a new leadership profile. And that leadership profile, I must say, emphasizes that we as leaders must be digitally capable. Leaders can no longer treat technology as something that is alien to be delegated to younger recruits. We all need to understand data flows, cybersecurity, interfaces, and dashboards well enough to ask the right questions and make the right trade-offs. Second, we need to cultivate analytical capability. Decisions must be grounded in evidence, value for money, and not anecdotes, and not personal preferences. Third, we must evolve a collaborative capability. Our greatest risk as a society and as a country, and our history tells us so, is that we often live in silos, and our greatest risk are the gaps between institutions. Agriculture needs roads and transport to make agro-parks work. Ministry of Trade needs customs and standards to move goods quickly, effectively, and safely. Ministry of Works needs water and power to deliver infrastructure that functions. Technology is not an add-on. It is a core public infrastructure for a state that serves the citizens 24 hours a day. Governance must also evolve. Compliance will ask the question, did we spend? And the citizen's real question will be, after you have spent, did it work? That should be our measure. We should move towards outcome contracts, routine public dashboards, and real consequences that recognize success and correct failure. In plain terms, success will be when we see fewer queues, faster cycle times, more manufacturing and service jobs created, leakages and corruption closed, and higher satisfaction among citizens and businesses with the public services that are designed to serve them. To keep this practical, we propose 4 steps every agency can begin with in the next 90 days. First of all, appoint a senior 24-hour plus champion in your organization to lead a tailored implementation plan and report progress to your board and to your respective commission. Second, conduct a regulatory audit and list the forms, permits, and processes that slow businesses or invite rent seeking, and table specific timelines to address these issues. Third, select your 5 most used citizen and business services and digitize them end to end so that they are fully accessible and trackable online at any time of day. Fourth, choose one sister institution amongst you whose work is tightly linked to yours and set up a simple data sharing protocol to remove one shared bottleneck that will make a visible difference. Colleagues, the 24-hour economy is a non-threatening way to rebuild capability, trust, and collaboration. It will succeed or fail on the strength of the public service. Let us choose to be remembered not for being obstacles, but enabling growth and transformation. Let us build institutions that are as dynamic, innovative, and relentless as the Ghanaian people we serve. At this point, I'll invite Nas to come and give us a short view and explanation of the deck. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Of change. The important thing here that perhaps we want to focus on is the 3 pillars on which we built the program. So that the 24 hours in the day is not enough to basically utilize all the productive resources, so we need to run in shifts. Supply chain and market systems efficiency. This for us was very important because we realized that to be competitive, Ghana is actually oftentimes very competitive at the farm gate. What happens is that when we move from the farm gate to factory or farm gate to market, by the time you get there, we are not competitive. Why? Because there's so much inefficiencies in our logistics and supply chain systems. One report actually says that when you pick a product on the shelves in the market today, about 60% of that cost can be attributed to the inefficiencies in our supply chain. So it's important we improve this. And that's why that's a pillar to improve supply chain efficiencies and make sure that we are competitive. And finally, it's about human capital development. Building the people with the right skill set, the right mindset, to be able to power the kind of efficient economy that we are looking to produce. We built this 8 sub-programs, which I think somebody gave us an acronym for. So I'll move forward with that. This is in the program document. Once you take a look at the program document, you'll be able to see most of this. The key principles that's guiding the way we are operating and the way we are moving things forward is number 1, when we take issues, we are looking at it through the full value chain and also looking at how other value chains integrate into it. So we are not solving problems in pieces, which oftentimes you see happening because we took a look at a lot of the problems, the solutions that we have. You realize that they are very fragmented. What we are looking at a full integrated value chain approach to solving the problems that we encounter. Then we see the Secretariat as playing a coordinating and advisory role. So we're bringing together all the people and all the resources that we have that will enable us to be able to resolve the problems that we identify. Also importantly, our strategy has necessarily had to be private sector focused. So we are building the program on the back of the private sector. And I'll show you how that is translating into execution. But the reason is, one, we recognize the fact that government's fiscals are constrained. You can't rely on government balance sheet alone to achieve the kind of transformation that we want to achieve. But also, importantly, the private sector has long-term interest. So if you build it on the back on the private sector, then you are not then constrained to the 4-year electoral cycles that we have. You actually have people who have long-term interest and that can take this beyond just the 4 years that we have. So as much as possible, what you see is a structure where we are building the funding of government balance sheets, right? And the key thing that we are asking government to do is provide what we call the viability gap funding. And I'll explain to you why the viability gap funding is important. Once we have that viability gap funding, then everything else is built on the back of private sector, so that we can move this forward. Why the 24-hour economy? First is, if you take a look at this, so this, we're looking at contribution to GDP. And what sectors contribute to GDP growth in the country. And you realize, tells you, is that as an economy, we are becoming more and more import dependent. And if reducing, like the way we have, before you see service grow, like the way you are seeing here, you see industrialization, manufacturing also growing, because then they build the technology. We haven't built the technology. Basically, what we've done is we've exported all our jobs, and so we have a huge, services sector, and our productive sector continues to shrink over time. We decided to, we disaggregated and looked at a number of things. The most surprising thing for us was actually the food imports. And beyond the fact that we are importing about $3 billion of food every year, you also have this situation where some of the stuff that we are importing, we don't actually need to import. So number 2 on here was guts, bladders, and stomachs of animals. That's our number 2 largest food imports in this country. So you go to a chop bar and you think your light soup is made from some animal killed in Ghana. No, it's most likely coming from Netherlands or somewhere else, right? And these are things that we need to be able to change. The results, and this is very important to note, the results of exporting almost all our production is this situation where you see GDP growing over time, but you have jobs not growing as much. So the ability of our economy to create jobs with growth is severely constrained. During the campaign period, and when we're looking at the manifesto, I remember we worked with Professor Babuatin, he's here. We worked with him to do some analysis of the economy and its ability to create jobs. And you realize that the employment elasticity of output for our economy has fallen over time. In around 1997, I think about 0.7. By 2024, when we're looking at it, it was around 0.2, which means for every 10% growth you see by 2024, you are going to see employment growing by 2%, right? Significantly constrained. What we want is we want growth to be able to translate into jobs. And that's when then you are creating prosperity for your people. So the whole point of the 24-hour economy is to transform this economy into one where we are productive, we are efficient, we are competitive, and then by doing that, we're able to create jobs and prosperity for our people. The process, basically, I'll run through this quickly. We did a lot of analysis, worked with Ghana Statistical Service, a number of other agencies, and we've selected priority sectors and value chains because whilst we would like to do everything, we are limited in time and resources. So you need to focus on what is most important. So we looked at sectors where, one, we have a competitive advantage. 2, sectors that contribute a lot more to inflation, where we have a huge import bill, and that value chains that also have impact on other value chains. And selected, these are the priority sectors we are going to focus on. And within those areas, try to diagnose what are the systemic constraints that prevent us from growing, and then put in place interventions that allow us to be able to overcome these systemic constraints. The way we talked about the interventions, that it has to be catalytic. So it should be something that when you do, it allows other people to be able to also easily come in and move forward. Now, because our strategy is necessarily private sector driven, we've had to then convert these interventions into bankable projects. Because if you want the private sector to come in, what you want to do is to present them with a project where they can clearly see where their money is going to and how they get their money back. So what you then see is we've created projects and are going out now to invite people to come and look at the projects and be able to invest in it. When we talk about private sector, though, we are not only talking about big corporates. We are talking about cooperatives, we are talking about the smallholder, and most importantly, we are also talking about the state commercial sector. So the state commercial sector is part of the private sector that we are talking about here. So next steps, we're trying to get an all-of-government alignment. Why is this important? It's important because if we want to do an integrated value chains approach, our model is that every project would have a policy component, production component, and then offtake built into it. Now, production and offtake, that's important, so you see the whole value chain, but the policy bit is government, right? So you need to ensure that all of government is aligned and is able to drive the policy elements that allow these projects to be successful. And so I'm sure a lot of you will see us coming to you and trying to work with you to look at how we put in place a few policy interventions to make some of these things go forward. Then we are currently doing project preparations, and this I'll try to explain it a bit more. So the key constraints that we identified included bulk infrastructure. So private sector tells you that when you are coming to Ghana to invest, you don't only, so you want to build a factory, you don't only think about the factory that you are coming to build, you also need to think about the access roads. You need to think about energy. You need to think about all of those things. So the absence of the bulk infrastructure makes setting up businesses a lot more expensive. It increases your cost of doing business. And so we need to be able, if we want businesses to be able to be more profitable, we need to overcome this issue of the absence of bulk infrastructure. And that's where we are working with the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund. We're lucky we have that kind of fund that has the ability to set up sub-funds and an ability to set up SPVs and collaborate with the private sector to get things done. So GIF will be setting up SPVs, a sub-fund that feeds into these SPVs, and these SPVs will work with the private sector, private banks, and all of those to be able to crowd in more investment to build the bulk infrastructure that we are looking for. For this to happen, we need to do feasibility studies and pre-feasibility studies. And that's what the project preparation is. So we've designed the project. We are now doing feasibility and pre-feasibility studies. We are working with a few people to fund some of these. Some of our development partners have agreed to fund a few of the projects, and we're still looking for others to be able to fund some of the pre-feasibility studies. Now, a critical part of that pre-feasibility study that we are doing is to also establish what the viability gap funding is. Because when you're doing bulk infrastructure, they are not always commercially viable. But if you want private sector to come in, what you then need to do is you need to be able to bridge that viability gap so that the private sector can come in and invest. We're looking to government for some of the viability gap funding, but we are also looking to climate finance for some of the viability gap funding. Because if you talk to climate finance, the GCF and others, they tell you that a critical criteria for them is that there has to be additionality. So what we've done is for the Volta Economic Corridor that we are looking at as the anchor project, we've designated it as a net zero economic zone. And for that to happen, it means that most of the investments there need to be green and need to be climate friendly. And for that to happen, it cannot happen without the Green Climate Fund. So part of what we are doing under the project preparation is structuring viability gap funding around climate financing so we can get funding from the Green Climate Fund. We are told they can give us up to about $250 million. So we're working towards getting that. Our hope is that by the end of year, we would have been able to do pre-feasibility for some projects. I'll show you some of the projects. And then we can start project development and investment activation, where we are actually going out. We will be working with the GIPC and others to actually go out and sell these projects and get investors to be able to come in. So for investors, this is what we offer. I don't think we need to work too much on it. This is the structure with GIF. Just the key thing here is once we set up the parks and the agroecological parks and the SPVs, private sector can then go in, and then we are also working on a mechanism to be able to provide enterprise financing to the private sector for them to be successful. Different ways private sector people can invest in this. You can either come in and invest in the SPVs that provide the bulk infrastructure as equity providers or debt providers. You could come in as an enterprise within the parks that we are setting up, or to provide transport on the lake, or provide technology, do EPC, be an EPC partner, provide O&M services to the parks and all of that. These are some of the projects that we are working on right now. So there's a cassava industrial corridor that we are looking at. That corridor spans parts of Volta, Oti, and Savannah region. There's a sugar industrial corridor which is being built around Esuchari. We have an integrated grains and oilseeds corridor up in the northern region. There's a rice corridor. For rice, there are actually 3 projects we are looking at: Pualugu, Tono, and Pong. There's a blue economy aquaculture park on the Volta Lake, a poultry cluster, and some urban farming projects. There's also the Legon Pharmaceutical Innovation Park, for which we are looking at putting in Akuse. There's a North Shore Light Industrial Park. There's a machinery and technology park that we are looking at to put in Kumasi. And that's basically to produce the basic equipment and tools that we use for farming and all of that. There's the Akosombo Japan Textile Cluster, which is still a bit iffy. And then the Kwahu Beverages Park, that currently we are looking at Adeso, to put it in Adeso. And we're working with Casapreco on that one. On transport, there's the Volta Multimodal Transport and Port. That is actually going to be one of the first that takes off and going to open up the Volta Economic Corridor. Because once we open up the transport, and the transport, there's already a business case for it, right? So once we open it up, then you can have things moving very quickly. And there are a few other projects. I'll leave it. If you are interested in this, if you go to our website, you'll be able to see some of these projects. And we are beginning to actually now go out and engage stakeholders on these projects. I'm sure many people have seen this Volta Economic Corridor video, so I won't talk much about it. This just explains what the Volta Economic Corridor. The role of the private sector. Mr. Tano has talked about a lot of these already, so to enabling results.